Let me ask you something and don't answer too quickly. When was the last time you felt truly supported, not helped with a task, not given advice, but emotionally held without having to explain yourself, perform strength, or prove that you deserved it? If you have to pause and think, this conversation is for you. To the outside world, you are the strong one. You're the person who keeps things moving. The problem solver. The one people call when their life is falling apart. You handle your career, your responsibilities, and other people's crises with a calm that looks like confidence. You rarely complain. You don't ask for much. And when someone checks in, your answer comes out automatically. I'm fine. I've got it. And most people believe you. What they don't see is what happens when the day finally goes quiet. When the messages stop. When there's no one left to take care of. That's when the weight shows up. A heaviness that doesn't have a clear name. A tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. A sense that you've been holding everything together for so long that you don't even know what it would feel like to let go. You're not exhausted because you're doing too much. You're exhausted because you're doing it alone. Somewhere along the way, being the strong one stopped being a role and became an identity. You learned how to function without leaning, how to carry without asking, how to stay composed even when things inside you felt anything but. And now, the idea of needing someone feels uncomfortable, maybe even unsafe. So you keep going. You keep managing. You keep proving mostly to yourself that you don't need help. But here's the truth. Most people never say out loud. Strength that never gets supported turns into silence. And silence, carried long enough, becomes loneliness. If any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not broken. You adapted. And today, we're going to talk about why. On the surface, independence looks the same, no matter where it comes from. Competence, self-reliance, the ability to handle things without falling apart. But psychologically, there are two very different versions of it, and no one ever teaches us how to tell them apart. Healthy independence is a choice. It comes from confidence, not fear. A healthy, independent person knows how to stand on their own and how to lean when needed. They can say, I can handle this, without feeling threatened by the idea of help. Their independence is flexible. It breathes. Hyperindependence doesn't feel like that. Hyperindependence is not a preference, it's a reflex. It's what happens when self-reliance stops being empowering and starts being compulsory. You don't think, I'd rather do this myself. You think, I have to. Because asking for help doesn't feel neutral. It triggers something deeper tension in your body. A spike of anxiety. A quiet resistance you can't quite explain. Have you ever felt uncomfortable when someone offered to help you, not annoyed, uneasy? Have you ever rejected support even while feeling overwhelmed, then wondered why no one seems to show up for you? That's the difference. Hyper-independence is armor. It's a protective layer built around one core belief. Needing something makes you vulnerable. And vulnerability, to a system that learned the hard way, feels unsafe. So you minimize your needs. You downplay your exhaustion. You tell yourself it's easier not to ask. Not because you're strong, but because somewhere inside, you learned that relying on others comes with a cost. This is where most people get it wrong. They see the capability and assume confidence, but what they're often looking at is fear that learned how to function, and that distinction changes everything. Most people assume that hyper-independence comes from strength, that at some point, you looked at the world and decided you didn't need anyone. But that's not how it actually happens. You didn't wake up one day confident enough to stand alone. You arrived there after learning, repeatedly, that asking didn't work. For a child, needing help is natural. It's biological. We are wired to reach out, to cry, to expect someone to come. So, when that reaching is met with dismissal, irritation, or silence, something has to change, not in the environment, but inside the child. And that's where the decision happens, not a conscious one, not a dramatic vow, a quiet, internal conclusion. I can't count on anyone. I'll handle it myself. That moment is painful, but it's also adaptive. It allows the child to keep functioning without waiting for something that may never arrive. Over time, that strategy hardens into an identity. You stop noticing the loss because competence fills the gap. You become capable, efficient, reliable. People praise you for it. But beneath that capability is a truth that rarely gets named. You didn't become strong because you were supported. You became strong because you were alone. I'll do it myself wasn't confidence, it was containment. A way to protect yourself from the disappointment of unmet needs. A way to stay ahead of rejection. If you never ask, no one can say no. If you never depend, no one can let you down. The problem is, what once kept you safe is now keeping you separate. That decision made in pain did its job. It helped you survive, but survival strategies aren't meant to run forever. And when we mistake them for personality traits, we stop questioning whether they still serve us. Understanding this isn't about blame. It's about finally seeing the cost of a strength that was built in silence. For many hyper-independent adults, the story doesn't begin with a choice. It begins with responsibility far too early. You were the child who grew up fast, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who sensed tension in the room and adjusted yourself accordingly. Maybe you took care of siblings. Maybe you became the emotional stabilizer for a parent who was overwhelmed, absent, or unpredictable. Or maybe no one explicitly asked you to step up, you just knew it was safer if you did. Psychology calls this parentification. It happens when a child takes on emotional or practical roles that belong to adults. Not because the child is capable, but because the system needs it. From the outside, it looks like maturity. You're praised for being so responsible, so easy, so independent. Inside, though, something else is forming. You learn that your value comes from what you provide, not from being held. That love arrives when you're useful, calm, and self-contained, not when you're needy. Picture a moment you probably don't think about often, a time you were overwhelmed, scared, or unsure, and decided not to say anything. Not because you didn't feel it, but because experience had already taught you that expressing it wouldn't change the outcome. So you swallowed it. You handled it. You moved on. That's where the pattern locks in. Needing something began to feel dangerous. Dependence felt like regression. And maturity stopped being a developmental stage, it became a survival strategy. As an adult, that same wiring remains. Asking for help doesn't feel like collaboration. It feels like failure. Like becoming that child, again exposed, waiting, and unsure if anyone is coming. So your system does what it learned to do best. It stays ahead. It stays capable. It stays alone. Hyperindependence isn't arrogance. It's the legacy of a childhood where strength was required before it was chosen. Even when you understand where hyperindependence comes from, something strange often remains. You can agree with every word and still feel your body tighten at the idea of asking for help. That's because this response isn't just psychological, it's physiological. For someone with a history of unmet needs, asking for help doesn't register as a simple social exchange. It registers as a threat. The moment you consider relying on someone else, your nervous system reacts automatically. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, lights up, preparing you for danger. You might notice it in subtle ways: a tightening in your chest, a clenching in your jaw, a sudden urge to say, "Never mind, I'll handle it." This isn't weakness. It's memory. Your body learned, long before language, that depending on others could lead to disappointment, loss of control, or emotional exposure with no protection. So it adapted. Control became safety. Self-sufficiency became regulation. That's why surrender feels unbearable. When you ask for help, you have to wait. You have to trust someone else's timing, competence, and care. For a system wired to stay ahead of risk, that pause feels dangerous, almost intolerable. This is also why receiving can feel harder than giving. Giving keeps you in control. Receiving requires you to stay open without knowing the outcome. Understanding this changes the narrative. You're not resistant to connection because you don't want it. You're resistant because your body learned to associate need with danger. Healing doesn't start by forcing yourself to ask. It starts by recognizing that your system isn't broken, it's been protecting you all along. Hyperindependence doesn't usually show up as conflict in relationships. It shows up as distance. On the surface, you're a good partner. You don't ask for much. You don't create drama. You handle your own problems. You rarely lean too hard. And at first, this feels like stability, maturity, emotional strength. But over time, something subtle begins to shift. When you don't need anything, there's no place for someone else to step in. When you never ask for support, your partner slowly learns that they are not required, not trusted, not essential, and even if they can't articulate it, they feel it. Love, at its core, is an act of care. It's expressed through being needed in small, human ways, listening, helping, showing up when things feel heavy. When you block access to your inner world, you're not protecting yourself from disappointment, you're preventing connection from forming. Many hyper-independent people eventually say the same thing. People always leave. But here's the harder truth, one that hurts to hear, but explains so much. You weren't abandoned. You were unreachable. If you never let someone see your uncertainty, your fear, your moments of, I can't do this alone, they don't get the chance to bond with you at that level. The relationship stays functional, but it never becomes deeply intimate. And when it ends, it confirms the belief you've carried for years. See, I really am on my own. So, what's often missed is that this pattern isn't about emotional coldness. It's about protection. You learned early that needing someone was risky, so you built relationships that don't require it. But love without need isn't safety. It's loneliness with company. Intimacy doesn't come from proving you're fine. It comes from letting someone see where you're not and trusting that they might stay. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being the one everyone leans on. If you're hyper-independent, you're often generous with your energy. You show up, you help, you listen, you fix. You're the reliable one, the person others trust to hold things together when they can't. From the outside, it looks like connection. It looks like purpose. Inside, it feels very different, because while people come to you with their problems, few ever sit with yours. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because you've trained them not to. You've taught the world that you're okay, that you don't need much, that you'll handle it, and over time, that creates a quiet resentment. You might catch yourself thinking, why does no one ever help me? Or, why do I always have to be the strong one? What hurts most is that you rarely say these things out loud because asking feels like breaking the role you've perfected. This is the cost of strength without reciprocity. When you're always giving, you stay in control. You stay useful. You stay needed. But you also stay unseen. The parts of you that are tired, unsure, or hurting never get mirrored back. And without being mirrored, those parts start to feel invisible. Boundaries are meant to protect you, but when boundaries never open, they become walls, and walls don't just keep pain out. They keep connection out too. Eventually, the weight shows up in other ways. Burnout, irritability, emotional numbness, even physical exhaustion. Your system wasn't designed to carry everything alone. Strength becomes isolating when it's the only way you know how to belong. Healing from hyperindependence doesn't mean swinging to the opposite extreme. It doesn't mean becoming dependent, needy, or losing your sense of self. It means learning a different model of strength. Interdependence is the ability to stand on your own and stay connected at the same time. It recognizes a truth our culture often ignores. Humans are not meant to be self-contained systems. We regulate each other. We grow through relationship. We recover through shared load. This is where many people get stuck because they confuse openness with exposure. They imagine that letting someone in means handing over control or risking everything at once. But interdependence isn't about opening the floodgates. It's about opening a door intentionally. Strength in this model isn't measured by how little you need. It's measured by how honestly you can acknowledge your needs without collapsing into shame. You can be capable and ask for help. You can be grounded and say, "This is hard." You can choose support without giving up autonomy. This shift is subtle but profound. Instead of asking, "Can I handle this alone?" the question becomes, "Who feels safe enough to share this with?" Not everyone earns that access. Discernment matters. Boundaries still matter. But walls no longer define the architecture of your life. Interdependence isn't weakness. It's what happens when strength no longer has to stand in isolation to exist. When you begin to loosen hyperindependence, something unexpected often happens. You don't feel relief right away. You feel uneasy. Asking for help, even in small ways, can trigger shame, anxiety, or an immediate urge to take it back. You might think, "Why did I say that?" Or, "I should have just handled it myself." This reaction can be confusing, especially when you know, intellectually, that support is healthy. But this discomfort isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that your nervous system is learning something new. For a long time, safety meant control. It meant staying ahead of disappointment by not needing anyone. When you start to ask, even for something small, your body reads it as unfamiliar territory, and unfamiliar doesn't feel safe yet. This is why healing has to be gradual. You don't start by sharing your deepest wounds or asking for major support. You start with micro-asks, small, low-risk moments of receiving, letting someone carry a bag, asking for clarification, admitting you're tired without apologizing for it. Each small experience gives your system new data. Nothing bad happened. I wasn't punished. I wasn't abandoned. Over time, those moments accumulate. Safety stops being something you maintain alone and becomes something you can experience with others. Healing doesn't mean forcing yourself to trust. It means allowing trust to build, one tolerable step at a time. You don't have to tear down the walls you built. They protected you when you needed them to. Healing doesn't ask you to become exposed or reckless. It asks for something much smaller and much braver. To lower the drawbridge just a little. To let one safe person see that you're human, that you get tired, that sometimes the weight is too heavy to carry alone. Strength isn't proven by how much you can endure in silence. Real strength shows up when you say, "This is hard for me," and allow yourself to be met there. You don't need to do this perfectly. You don't need to change overnight. One honest moment is enough to begin. If this video helped you recognize yourself even in a small way, consider staying with us. This channel is a space for the quiet patterns people rarely talk about, and the inner experiences that don't always have words. Subscribe if you want more conversations like this, and if you feel able, share in the comments. What is one thing you're carrying right now that you wish you didn't have to hold alone? You don't have to be the strong one here.